Welcome to the Audiation in the Wild podcast with your hosts, Bo Talifer and Eric Rasmussen. Episode 29, Extensions, or Extra Tones and Chords.
All right, Eric. So we're going to talk about extended harmony. Is that what you want to call it? No, not extended functions. Extensions of
Extensions. Yeah.
Extensions.
So, yeah.
Maybe can I play some extended functions?
Sure.
Sound
I don't know, can you?
So a lot of people will associate those sounds with like jazz, and I was playing kind of like a classic jazz sound, certain voicings and certain chord progressions, but we're really talking about chords like 7ths, 9ths, 11ths, 13ths, dominant, flat 9s. Even there's a couple other really common ones that people tend to not really, a lot of younger jazz players don't seem to be learning very much, like major 6 and minor 6 chords. But those kinds of sounds, and they're obviously in more music than just jazz. I mean, there's a lot of modern, like air quote modern, in the last 200 years, classical music. But they're in a lot of music.
Well, they're even in like Mary Had a Little Lamb, right? Fleece is white, if you want to consider that. Fleece is white as snow, right? Fleece is white as snow. So, can you hear that as... So they're naturally occurring when you do regular harmony with a melody. They occur, so there's naturally occurring extensions like that if you just pay attention to them or bring your students' audiation to, hey, mi's not part of so, ti, re, fa. I don't know what key I'm in when I sing, but you got so, ti, re, fa, and now there's a mi involved. Mi's not part of dominant, is it? Well, why not? Well, mi's part of tonic. And when we teach that way, we're avoiding the possibility of mi being part of dominant. And I think mi is a beautiful tone in dominant or other.
Yeah, so this is interesting because, the language I like for this is stipulation. So when we teach things like a 1 chord in major has do, mi, so, we're actually introducing a misrule to the student's mind, because a very particular kind of 1 chord has that, but there's nothing wrong with a 1 chord having a T or a re in it, and those are actually quite beautiful sounds, or a la in it, and it's not actually changing the way the function behaves in the music, which is probably the most important part.
That's what's cool. But I always say, hey, what's wrong with adding this? Do you like this sound? You don't like this sound? I talk to my 4-year-olds and 5-year-olds like that. This is just different. Can I do Mary Had a Little Lamb, or, can I do it differently? And I change major to minor and minor songs to major, doing it the right way and the wrong way. And then there's other choices to make besides right and wrong. Can you do it this way? Just different. Just listen to the difference. When I play the tritone substitutions for the kids, it's just, that's just that other way. It's not minor, it's not major.
We have to come back to the tritone subs. Because ironically, what's interesting is the tritone sub actually sounds better when it has extended harmony.
Oh, you have to.
So just right? Like if you're playing in the key of C and you try to put a D flat major chord in, that's fine. But if you put like D flat 9 or like D flat, like I like the 9 or the 13 even more than the just dominant 7. It actually makes the sound more recognizable.
Absolutely. It's the more to a point, the more you add to certain chords, you're really distinguishing that from the quote unquote normal function. And I think that makes it easier. When you add 7 and 9 versus just 7 or 9, right? So it's just, so that's just the 7. and here's just the 9. Sorry, I'm doing it wrong. It's the 7 and 9, and here's just the 9, which I don't like to play. I say I don't use it.
Or you like the 7?
Right?
Yeah, I think most people think about that as like an add 9, which actually sounds more pop-like to me.
Yeah, and they occur, again, they occur naturally more often, like just because you're just adding something.
A really common example of a major 6 chord. So on the 1 chord, if we're in the key of C, I'm just going to use that as an example. So I'm talking about putting the tone La in the tonic chord. That's very common when Do is in the melody. So like you're in kind of standard jazz, American songbook jazz, before things got super instrumental. I'm thinking like 20s, 30s kind of thing. It was standard if you were playing in major and Do is in the melody, you play a major 6 chord on that. You don't play a major 7 chord, because that T clashes with Do quite hard in the melody because they're only a semitone apart. But putting La in the chord makes the chord sound a little more sophisticated than just a normal tonic chord, but the La fits better with the Do.
Yeah.
And that's a really common use for that a lot of people don't apply, and I know Barry Harris and some of his kind of disciples have talked about that, just that common knowledge in the jazz scene about not knowing when to use a major 6 chord versus a major 7th chord. That's a really normal spot.
Yeah, and the other thing that needs to be brought into the equation is learning to audiate voicings. Like, where's the Mi, where's the Do, where's the So, where's the T? You put T in the bottom. That's quite different than when you have space between. But if put T there, those are the same tones, just in different voicings, and that to me is not even.
Well, a circumstance where that comes up a lot is where you go, I'll just call it the chords with the bass note. So you go in C, you go 1 with C in the bass, and then you go 1 with B in the bass, and then you go 1 with B flat in the bass. Now it's a C7 chord, and then it's going to an F chord. That's super common in line. So part of knowing the voicings is actually, and I'm sure you agree with this, is knowing common ways that you move through progressions with those voicings. Because for a lot of people, like what I'm getting at is that T in the bass in the tonic chord sounds bad, but when you put it inside of a progression that is actually standard issue, it sounds totally normal.
Yeah, because it's going some. You know exactly why it works, because you already are audiating where it's going to, if you're familiar with the progression. So
one of my students learned like a Motley Crue song. He watched this Motley Crue documentary, and then there's a Motley Crue song with that exact chord progression, and he was playing it for me, and he doesn't know what he's playing, but he can audiate that bass line with those chords, which is cool.
Yeah, the purpose of this is like, for me wanting to do this conversation or have this conversation is, what are we withholding from the students, and why? Why are we not teaching this early on, like at the oral level, or at the listening level? Are we giving? Why withhold it? Is because the other's easier? Well, it's not that much easier if you're got a huge listening vocabulary of it.
That's what I was going to say. The problem is, I think it goes very deep in terms of people aren't even playing these as an opportunity to get in your listening vocabulary, let alone actually starting to label things.
I initially thought it was insane to start my 3-year-olds with tritone substitutions, right? It's like, how ridiculous is that? But when it came time for me, what do? Well, you just play it. That's all you do.
Yeah.
And they learn to sing the melody while you're playing that.
And I really don't think like a tritone sub to a 3-year-old in major is not going to sound much like more foreign than just playing in Phrygian. Like they're both going to sound kind of alien.
Yeah, it's just a different sound, and there's not much to it. There really isn't anything to do except play it and sing and accompany yourself with it. And you can point out the root melody, like I do, or have parents sing the root melody while you sing the melody. Now I don't intentionally do that every class, but by the time they're 4 and 5, I'm definitely giving them, hey, here's a taste of a fruit you've never had before. Here's a star fruit. You don't see them very often here, unless you're in the South, Florida or whatever. But you're just giving them another flavor that, after a while you eat it, you start to recognize that flavor, and and then what is there to do with it? Well, same thing you do at the oral level with anything else. But my question is, I mean, there's already too much to do, right? I've got to do tonic and dominant and subdominant and major and minor and a couple other tonalities, and you've got to do the tonal patterns. You've got to go to verbal association and partial synthesis eventually, and you can. So when you start doing it that way, you're gonna hit. That you can't. It's too much to.
Well, I think one of two things is happening. Either the program for teaching it, and when I mean program, I mean the teacher's individual curriculum based off of whatever they are doing, Gordon or otherwise, it's not efficient enough, or the students don't have enough time. It's one of those two things, right? And it's probably a combination of both. I mean, we've talked about, I'm not seeing harmony in the way that it's talked about in learning sequences and music, and in a lot of the MLT curriculums that I've seen, it just doesn't seem fast enough. And that's why I found Eric's work, is because he seemed to be finding a way to get the functions and the harmony in people's ear at a rate that was much more realistic to actually progress through. Because basically what we're talking about is eventually someone is a competent musician that has a very large vocabulary of functions and tonal patterns and extended functions and all that, extensions of functions. But how did they actually, go through that? And I think a lot of what we have right now is just survivor bias. Some people just, their audiation aptitude and whatever they happen to do just worked. But I mean, we should be able to get to the bottom of how to teach more than 1, 4, 5 by the time someone's, out of elementary school.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
And you don't know if your kids, in my case, these 5, 6, 7-year-olds, you don't know if they're genius or not until you really give them something that's inedible to a lot of people. I'm on the food analogy today. It's just overwhelming, way too much. You see the kids, sink in their chairs, and then you see somebody else with the eyes wide open when you do something new. They show you that they're hungry for something. If you're paying attention, you want to stretch that as far as you can. And then when they snap, just go back to tonic dominant and go back to, the simple stuff so they have their anchor, something that they really know already. But if we're teaching that do mi so is tonic, well, that excludes do mi so inside of the subdominant function.
Yeah, exactly.
And you can't. You want to give them parameters that are realistic, and then you also want to give them an opportunity to really expand as fast as they're able to. Don't just give them a color wheel with 8 colors on it. Give them a color wheel with...
This is one of the issues we have with classes that are of mixed ability, and I know Gordon's view on, what you do in the classroom in terms of rearranging people, but ideally, people are in a class, if you have a very skilled students, if they were in a class of students that were of similar achievement and even aptitude level as them, you could kind of push them as a group together. But it gets hard when you only have, if you have 30 students, 30 minutes once a week, it's hard to have enough time to even start tailoring the instruction to individual students, because you just can't split yourself thin that many times.
It's next to impossible. So I always say the worst that's happening is at least all the kids are absorbing. At least they're, they're getting acculturated. That's the worst that's happening. And that's not a bad thing.
at all.
So, you know, my playlists of music, includes a fair amount of jazz. Not all of it
Yeah.
super fancy, but a lot of it is, there's a lot of extensions and extended functions as well, which are two different
There's
things.
extended functions that are played with extensions. Yeah, when we mean extensions, we mean individual chords or individual functions that have extra harmony beyond
Yeah,
just the root, third, and the fifth, or
yeah.
however you want to
Add, add,
conceptualize it.
add anything to it. Find it.
In terms of the practicality of, beyond just listening vocabulary, which I think is a big issue that should be addressed. People should be playing songs with extended function, with extended harmony. But when you're actually like taking people through some kind of sequence, because we don't really have information, like we don't have empirical data on this yet. I have some observational data from teaching enough piano and guitar students that there are certain functions that people tend to tolerate earlier on better with extensions on. So in major, for example, I frequently encounter the situation where a pianist does not like the sound of a major seven off the one chord, but they like the sound of a major seven off the four chord. And I have seen that play out with many different people. So it's interesting. I'm not, attempting to like brainwash people when I teach them. I just notice a lot of the times you show them like C major seven in the key of C, the B note like makes them like gasp. But you play F major seven off the four chord, it just flies by and they don't even say
Yeah,
anything.
yeah.
They like it.
If we were able to go back 50 years, is that how long Dr. Gordon started this research and developed his taxonomy of tonal patterns and taxonomy of functions? Like, why was this avoided? There needs to be. We need to.
Sure.
And I don't have the time or the wherewithal.
Or like let me give a few more examples. Like in the key of C, if you're talking about getting people to hear ninth chords, often D minor 9 is the one people really like. Or what's really weird is people often in the key of C like the sound of A minor 9 more than A minor 7. I don't know, I don't have answers to why it is. I can just tell you that so many of the people I've taught have gone through that progression to the point where like I now have a couple students who compose a lot, and a couple years ago they hated the sound of seventh chords and ninth chords, and now like they never show me a song that doesn't have ninth chords in them. Like they're just like obsessed with them.
Yeah.
Now.
How about just take PMMA and IMMA, and they kind of hold on to a tonality for a good while, and eventually it does change, and keyality. Why there wouldn't be patterns used in that would be extended functions.
That would be interesting. I've often thought about this when we talk about people taking aptitude tests. Like, for example, if we had 100 or even 1,000 people that had perfect aptitude tests in every metric, maybe that many people don't even exist. But let's say hypothetically they do. There probably is still a skill variance between those top performers. And there's probably questions that are on there are probably questions that could be on the PMMA that would split them up more granularly in terms of like, ability to identify extended harmony.
There is an issue because I know how that test got constructed was with easy, medium, and difficult patterns and comparing them. There's certain patterns that are more difficult just of themselves, and so when you put that pattern with itself, the sameness is much more difficult than differences that are slight variations. Although one of the patterns that is different from its partner in one of the questions is so close, and one of the tones that's changed is in the middle, so it's easy to let it fly by, and that's a different problem than when the patterns are the same and they're both difficult.
Yeah, so the aptitude test that I took, I don't think I've taken PMMA, but I took a harmony one, a tonality one. I don't know
I
what
don't.
was it?
I
What did
you know. I think it's a. I think you made this up. No, I, I
No,
think
it's
it's
in that
what. It's
book.
a book
It's
that
in
has
that
a
book.
CD in
Am
it.
I musical?
Was
Yeah, it has a CD in it, and there's like 40 questions, and it's just chords like bing, bang, boom.
I
There's three
have the book, but
chords.
I've
The
never
first and the last.
listened to the CD. How crazy is
I
that?
got one wrong. I got one wrong, and I believe the one that I got wrong was like that. There was a middle tone, and I probably just. I mean, when I went back and listened to it, I was like, oh, of
Yeah,
course that's different. But I
but
think
you,
I just wasn't paying
well,
attention
your
to the
initial
tone.
no. What happens is that your audiation is just that tick off at that point,
Sure,
and that's
sure,
it's more than just not paying attention because you don't have to pay attention. You have
sure,
to
sure,
overcome that.
sure.
Um,
What's interesting though is like there definitely seems like a difference. Like maybe there was some burnout going on in the test, and we've talked about how that's part of the
yep.
aptitude test. There's 40 questions in a row, and your fatigue level has something to do with like you don't get very fatigued if you can
Yeah.
audiate well. But what's funny is like my aptitude is high enough where if you show me the question again and actually tell me no, those are different, I can listen to it and be like, oh yeah, that is different. But I imagine some people's aptitude would be low enough where you could just point blank tell them that like these are different, and then they go and listen to it and they're like,
When I
have no
first
idea
got
what
the
you're talking
advanced measures of music audiation, and it's just a melody, and then
Okay.
there's another melody.
Okay.
It's pretty much the same, except if it's not, there's a tone off, or there's a rhythm that's off. And before I had the answer sheets, I went through it, and I can't tell you how many times I listened to some of the items and couldn't decide if it was the same or different after I listened to it maybe 5 or 6 times. So I brought a friend in, and we sat at the table, the breakfast table, and she's like, "No, that's different." I'm like, "No." And then she pointed it out, and I'm like, "Oh my God, I couldn't hear that."
Okay, do you have? I don't know how this. Wait, do you have? You have the PMMA?
Yeah.
It'd be funny if we should do it with me live on the podcast.
The PMMA, no, it's for it works for like kindergarten, first grade, and after that I use
what's the test for
IMMA.
adults?
So that's for
that's
intermediate. That's for first to fourth grade. But by the time you get to fourth grade, it's better to do, of course, MAP, Music Aptitude Profile. But then also, they've got an awful, so that they span over top of each other. But Music Aptitude Profile. But then there's also advanced AMMA, Advanced Measures of Music Audiation. That works for, even sixth graders.
So I want MAP or AMMA.
Yeah, I would do AMMA with you.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I'm imagining, because I know how these questions on the aptitude tests are phrased. They're testing your ability to hear sameness and difference. But how could we could construct this for extended harmony too? Like we could really do the same thing.
Yeah, you would want to come up with. Well, I think you'd have to have, like MAP does, 2 parts.
Mm-hmm.
You need somebody establishing the roots or a melody that matches the functions, and then a melody over top.
Yep.
That play.
One thing that I've done, and like we've talked about this before, but it might be interesting for people to hear, is like when I started learning to hear like 1 5 1, but making the 5 chord like a ninth, so in like the key of C, like making it G9 or G flat 9. If you juxtapose those two back and forth enough and play them and learn to sing them, the flat 9, the G7 flat 9 becomes so obvious that it's almost comically easy to differentiate between the two. And so I'm picturing something like that where like you have like 1 5 1.
I think we'd be
9 and 1 5 1. That's a flat.
We'd be getting
9.
out of the realm of aptitude measure at that point, because you need.
Well, yeah, I mean, because I actually practiced to be able to do that, but I'm assuming you could do something like that with someone's ability to even hear.
Although it's important to understand that there is no aptitude measure that doesn't include achievement, and there's no achievement measure, obviously, that wouldn't include aptitude. in it.
Yeah,
So
and that's interesting
you
because
try to
like
get as much of it out as you can, so that it's objective. But there's error.
yeah,
There's
yeah,
error
and
built into any measure like that.
yeah, and that makes sense because if we made a test like that and then that question just came up where it's like the difference between like a 5 chord with a 9 or a flat 9, and I had already pinned that into my memory. I mean, that question
Yeah,
wouldn't be difficult for me to
yeah.
answer.
We'd come up with a pool of hundreds and hundreds of questions, and then give them to enough
Mhm.
people, and then choose the ones that give you the really easy. The worst people still get them right, and the best people still get these wrong. And then you have
Sure.
a span of stuff, and maybe eliminate the top, few percent at the very top and few percent at the very bottom, and then the rest just
Sure.
speckle around.
And so I'm wondering if this is what I've been noticing over the past 5 years, where when I start teach people on the guitar and the piano, seventh and ninth chords, there's this tendency for people to enjoy the sound in major of this 4 chord with the major 7 on it. And I wonder if it's just because that one's easy to audiate. So it's like everyone
Yep.
likes that one because
No,
it's
I've seen
easy to
that
audiate compared
somewhere
to some of the
too,
other ones.
or experienced that. And I remember that when you mentioned it, that I had already known about that. That a 4 chord
That's
with the
interesting.
major 7 is easier.
And just for reference, like I've never heard anyone else say that. That's just something I noticed from my own learning and trying to teach
Yeah,
other people this. How many people don't like the major 7 off 1? People like the major 9 off 1, though.
yeah,
They like that. So it's interesting that there is a bit of a hierarchy. And you can do this with other tonalities too. Like Dorian works really well with like minor 7 off 1, minor 9 off
hmm
1, minor 11 off 1, minor 13 off. Like it's
So they
fine. Dorian off the 1 chord can handle a beating, but everything else tends to not sound
every
that
time we
great.
get into
It's
conversations like this, I just want to beg for money. Let me do the research. Pay me to do the research.
yeah.
I've got time. It, otherwise, I fill it in with something else. But it would be awesome to really do this the way Gordon did it back then in terms of intensity.
Mm-hmm.
The-
Well, another thing that I've noticed in terms of like the practical aspect of teaching this on an instrument, when you first start teaching these functions, it's very useful if you keep the voicings the same on the instrument. So like if you're teaching someone how to audiate a major 7 off 4 on the piano and on the guitar specifically, keep the voicing identical until they can audiate that voicing. Don't keep changing the voicing while they're still kind of getting the sound into their memory and into their, just like how before you start giving people when people are learning tonal patterns, before you start teaching them how to do inference activities where they're flipping the tonal patterns upside down and doing weird things with them, you just make sure they can audiate the base tonal
mhm.
pattern. I
Oh
think
yeah,
in terms of just playing the damn thing on the piano or the guitar, keep the voicing similar so it's something that they get habituated to. And then after, over time you can have them drop a note out of it or rearrange the order of the tones. But I found that is very useful for getting these sounds in people's ears, just keeping the voicings. It doesn't always have to be the same in terms of like not every major seventh chord has to be voiced in the same way, but like if all your 4 chords in major have a certain voicing, people seem to learn to audiate it faster in my experience.
yeah. It's a whole can of worms. Where it just needs to be a whole lot of research, a whole lot of. Uh, I'm sure as we developed a taxonomy of patterns, or a taxonomy of harmonic progressions, which I think is more important, and not just ABA patterns like tonic dominant tonic, always coming back to the first iteration of, and it's usually tonic and then something else tonic, tonic something else tonic, and
Can we unpack why that is? Because
I don't know
I'm
I
with
don't
you.
know
I just
why you
want
can't do one
no
chord.
I, no I
Yeah,
oh no yeah
I just
go
don't.
ahead
Yeah,
finish that
I
thought.
don't know why there isn't 1 6 4 5 1 or one whatever.
I don't know why either, because that's actually much more. It seems more relevant as a skill to possess, and two, it actually seems easier if what we talked about is true, where achievement is it feeds into
Yeah, and the
more
purpose of the
achievement.
taxonomy would be supposedly to develop, right? easy, medium, difficult vocabulary. So there's better progressions to learn than others earlier, or is it better to go to new tonality? What's easier to do? And then also, for the purpose of an aptitude, if you're building these patterns in terms of aptitude measured, like a harmonic improvisation readiness record, HIRR, and the RIRR, how those are developed. In terms of extensions, we're not talking about RIRR, we're talking about HIRR. Why is that always, ABA? The B is the only thing that changes.
There are progressions that are difficult to audiate like that too. Like this example that I've just beaten with a dead horse. If you're in the key of C, if you go C major, and then all of a sudden F sharp minor 7 flat 5, like back to C major, what does that mean? That doesn't mean anything. But if you go C major, F sharp minor 7 flat 5, B7 to E minor, that all of a sudden makes total sense. And there's a ton of musical examples that have that. But it's funny. I think I'd actually have an easier time doing that than, of course, than the
first
than
one.
The ABA.
Yeah. The question becomes though that a function of achievement. You wouldn't use it for an aptitude measure, but what I'm questioning is where can it be? Or why not? Where can you add extensions to these to these easy, medium, difficult patterns that you're presenting in pairs to see what's easy to audiate and what's not?
Sure. Because I think when we talk about designing a specific curriculum that we're going to actually implement, we're not just talking theoretically anymore. I think two things have to be taken into account. One is the ease of what we're asking people to audiate in what order. So, there's a reason you're asking people to audiate tonic dominant before other things, because it's actually easy to do. But also it's relevant. So like what I'm thinking is that, this example that I keep giving, why would you learn to audiate 2/5 of 3 while you're playing jazz rather than just some random function like 2/5 of flat 2, right? Is because it's actually relevant to the repertoire. It has a usefulness. And so even though it's hard to audiate, it has a usefulness. And I think so both those things have to be taken into account. And when we look at extended harmony, like if you do like D minor 9, D flat 9
extensions,
to C major 7,
or extended harmony.
I
just want to be really precise about the language here because it's important.
I think a lot of people would call extensions and extended harmony the same thing. I would say when we start talking about extended functions, I would be actually thinking like functions that go beyond like the vanilla functions that are in a tonality. But yeah, I mean, we're talking about chords with sevenths, ninths,
and when you do extended functions, they almost always have something like that in them.
But what I'm getting at here is in terms of the audiation difficulty and the relevance in the repertoire, a lot of repertoire that uses these extended functions is jazz music, and there are certain almost cliches that are in the music. So like, if you're in C minor, people will all the time play like G7 sharp 9 or however you want to say it, G7 sharp 5 sharp 9 to C minor. And that move is so common that in my mind, it's actually worth just teaching as a piece of vocabulary. Its usefulness is so high that, and its prevalence in the literature, that should be kind of moved up to the order that you teach it in. And I think that's kind of what we need to establish, some kind of map of what's easy to audiate and what's useful, and not just what's theoretically possible. Because you talked about there's so much shit that you can learn. Sorry for my language, but you'll just get in the weeds so fast.
That's where generalization and the ability to teach yourself, right? So you just learn that on your own, just from whatever repertoire you're engaging with, or the people you're playing with. Hey, I found this new sound, and you're in a band, and you're rehearsing every week, and you're banging things down. It's like, no, I don't like that. You got to work it out. There's So this should not be disruptive. This conversation that we're having about where does this belong is not, if anybody hears this as a disruption to MLT, it, no, it's got to fit in.
Yeah, no, if anything, what I'm thinking is like, you do your Dorian songs with the kids once in a while, just put like a minor 9 on the one chord and maybe sneak that in, and that's what Eric's doing. That's what I'm doing all the time. I'll often do that with students where we have some kind of repetitive song that we're working on, repetitive in terms of like we're working on it for a few weeks to get it in someone's ear. I'll just start putting different harmony under it, and I might ask, like, did something change?
Yeah, and we're only playing with the content here. We're not talking about playing with anything else but the content. My yes, no, uh-oh, and I don't care, that's messing with MLT. Because I suggest that makes learning to sing tonal patterns easier, right? But otherwise, what we're talking about here is your typical, get through your early childhood stuff with the, go up through imitation and assimilation.
Yeah, and you can do tonal patterns for
then,
exactly what we're talking about.
And just change the content. We're only changing the content. We're not messing with the skill levels here at all in terms of, we're just saying why can we not add extensions to the content of the harmonies that we're teaching? And I think that's,
the content is radically different. Like it really is different. I had a piano student, an adult student, a couple years ago. He had played in a lot of like wedding bands and stuff, but they never played jazz tunes. They only played chords with, they played like a dominant 7 on the 5 or whatever, but they only played like triads, right? And he came to me because he wanted to learn some jazz tunes on piano, and it was like you're starting new content. Like these 7th chords and these 9th chords, they were really new sounds for him to absorb. And it took him a while to get into it, even though he had such a command over playing like 1-4-5 and, 1-6-2-5 with just basic harmony in like every key. But adding this other content onto it was really like a whole new, he had to go through some kind of skill learning sequence. Yeah. I wasn't doing it in the exact way.
Yeah.
But
I remember when I was in high school, I was writing stuff. I remember. Let's see if I can remember a little bit of it. So it was. I don't remember exactly, but this thing I worked on for months, at.
I like the begin. Can you play the beginning again? That was cool.
And I forget what I. And then.
That's cool.
And it was the same tone, but a different. I couldn't audiate it then. I can't audiate it now.
that sounds like it could be like a Nintendo game. Like
I think that's part cool. of it's Chuck Mangione-ish. That's somebody I listened to back then. I don't remember. I wish I could go back and find out where that where it came from in my vocabulary. Like that I found.
Did you have a name for it?
I don't remember if I did or not.
There was one more thing I wanted to talk about related to this topic. So you talked about how melody notes. So if we're playing a piano or we're singing over top of what chords we're playing, maybe on the guitar or the piano, often what we can do is we can take the melody notes of a song, and instead of just thinking as the melody note is unrelated to the harmony, you think of the melody note as part of the harmony. So you gave us a couple of examples of that. You gave us one with like me being in the 5 chord in major. But eventually that's where this ends up going, is that you stop thinking of, like say we're playing a 1 chord and you play any tone off of it, you think of it as a type of chord. So if the melody has la in it, I think of that as like a major 6 chord. If the melody has T, it's like a major 7 chord. If the melody has whatever,
Yep.
Re, it's a major 9 chord. And you start conceiving everything as harmony, even if it's not part of just the
Well, it
basic
depends
function.
because there still are passing tones that don't matter, and neighbor tones
Sure.
and whatever else. You know, all the non-harmonic tones that they put in. Like Mary Had a Little Lamb at the beginning. You're not considering this a 9 at all. It's just ridiculous.
It could, but you know, in a way, like that is fine. Like that's what I'm getting at. Is like that is kind of a thing.
Well, yeah,
Because what you could do is you could take. Let's say this is in your listening
that.
vocabulary.
I just ignore that. But fleece is white as doesn't. It isn't ignorable to me.
Well, that one lands more on the. It lands on a different part of the meter. But like what I'm getting at with hearing that D note over the 1 chord is you can. You know, first you might have a melody in a song, right? You have this melody in Mary Had a Little Lamb. Then later you're improvising, or you might be actually comping. So I'm talking about improvising with chords. You can take that vocabulary. So instead of, I can go.
Yeah.
And that D note, yeah, it's true. I'm thinking of that as a melody, but it also is lighting up in my mind as like a C major 9. Like it's the same thing. The melody and the harmony.
If you've been taught that already, right? So if you already have that at the oral level, at least, right? Mm-hmm. That, yeah, then yeah, and then even you wouldn't light up with the verbal associate next to it, but it should light up. And once the verbal associate gets added to it, and you hear that as with the tonal syllables, now you have a stronger connection between that sound because you have an associate to go with it, the verbal associate. Mm-hmm. Right? You're naming the connection in the brain and stabilizing it with words.
Sure.
With a syllable. And now you put those syllables together, you can make words out of them. So now you're into harmonic progressions. So in order for you to say what you said, you'd have to have been taught that, or you had taught yourself to do that.
Well, because what happens is, like as a very specific example of what you were saying is, at some point I was doing stuff like this, and I was learning to kind of sing a major 9 chord as a tonal pattern, and then eventually when I started doing stuff like that note reminded me of the tonal pattern, and it just sounds like an extension. It doesn't sound like a passing tone anymore.
Yeah, but we could argue about that.
It's cool.
At one point,
no, I don't.
It doesn't really matter. But it's like the ones that are really hammered in the melody.
And some of them land. You know, when they're landing on like macro beats, it's really it changes how you hear them. Like
I keep going to this tune because I use it so much. Let it shine, let it shine, let it. That one. There it is. It's another me, dominant with me, and that's even harder to.
That one's all that you hear that,
and
all
that's
the time.
You could fill it out, and there's your 4 chord, right? 4 chord with T in it. And then dominant. But if you do this, it's so much more pleasant than it is.
That one's really common. Charlie Parker plays. You'll see him lay on the, however you want to say it. He's on that tone on the 5 chord all the time. Yeah. Me is interesting. A while ago, I was saying that like the chord that goes off of fa in any tonality tends to be like a very nice chord to harp on. The tone mi works really well over a lot of different functions.
Yeah.
Like,
well,
it
that
works very, very well.
4 chord is as as prevalent or almost more prevalent in the blues than anything else, right? And the dominant only comes in at the very end, and then goes to the four chord before it gets to the end. So maybe it's a function of that listening vocabulary that's so pervasive. And why is the blues still it's still running hard after 150 years or more? How long? Or 200?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean,
it's at least
it's one of those forms that can. Yeah, and I think a lot of the reasons why the blues has survived is that it's simple enough that a beginner can play it, but it's open enough that you can get kind of crazy on it if you're skilled, and so it really opens up.
So this brings us back to what's easier. I teach the blues probably before I do any other extensions. I do do with te in it. They're tonic with te and subdominant with me, and that's all you got to teach. That's it. Everything else is normal. Sure. But, when you say this is a dominant sound and it has to go to here, well, now you're reframing that this sound is actually the,
That's actually a really good point, because I think tonic, a lot of people...
This is tonic, and telling kids this is tonic, but it's a dominant sound. You got to be careful there.
Yeah.
You got.
Yeah, and that, I wonder, I can imagine a lot of people would want to, like, with the blues, start no sevenths on anything.
Yeah, no,
I think that's a mistake.
I play the blues songs without them for the kids, and I say, which do you like better? Yeah. And a blues song has to have that in it, or just as kind of bland. And yet, if I add the blues tones to Mary Had a Little Lamb, it's no good. So it has a character. Yeah. The songs have a character to it, and
the songs do have a character, and the harmony often has a humongous impact on that character. Like, take any jazz tune and take the sevenths out.
Yeah, Well, the form too is the thing that's always in the background more than anything. It's way in the background.
Mm-hmm.
It should be. It's the stadium in which you're playing. It's the form, and then you get to come in a little bit more, and you've got the progressions, and you come in a little bit more, you've got the melody, and you come in any more, you finally end up with the tonality, and then inside that the resting tone, and inside that whatever happens in a child's brain before it's born. I don't know.
So speaking of going against the MLT way, there's an interesting... Joe Pass used to practice his scales in a certain way. And I know, MLT people are very sensitive about scales, but instrumentally...
But scales are in the literature. So if you play a Mozart piano concerto, right? Tell me there's no scales in there. So play scales. It's part of the repertoire. Play scales. You need the technique.
There's a really good analogy that goes between mathematical learning and I think what you're saying with music learning. In teaching kids math really efficiently, and this has been on my mind because I started math tutoring lately, what are the most fundamental skills you have to teach someone? Counting. Until they can count efficiently, you're not teaching them addition, subtraction, you're not teaching them multiplication, division. It all is based off counting and skip counting and all that kind of stuff. I think the musical equivalent of that, tonal patterns, are a way of basically skip counting sounds, and scales are a way of these. You want these to be audiated. I'm not talking about theoretically teaching people this stuff, but these sounds have to be in people's ears, and I think scalular sounds, scalular,
I guess.
Yeah, my lack of university education's coming out.
Sometimes it worsens.
Scalar sounds are valid in terms of audiation content. But what I was going to say is a very interesting way that Joe Pass used to practice scales, and I've been doing this for a while, is he would take a chord with an extension on it, and he would play... You play the scale up to the extension, and I noticed after a couple of years of doing this, it does something to your ear in terms of like when you just play a chord out of nowhere with an extension on it, the whole thing from the resting tone, if it is the resting tone that you're on, it could be in a different function. It just lights up in your mind, the pattern, and you almost start hearing these little melodies that would lead up to that tone. But I thought it was a much more creative way to. He would do something cool though. Like if the top note was a B on like an A7 chord, he would keep that top note the same on like another chord. And keep that. He would keep pinning that top note to it, and it does some cool things to your ear.
Yeah, for sure. So scales definitely get a bad rap, and I understand the reason why, because they're used without the use of tonal patterns or understanding functions or understanding. It's a theoretical construction, these scales. But when you're audiating, then it becomes not it doesn't become music theory, it becomes theoretical understanding.
It's funny too, like if you have a student that can audiate a song that's like da 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 da, and they know nothing about theory, they don't know how to construct a scale.
You don't have to.
They can just find that on their instrument. And for me, after they can find it, with their ear and with exploring, I just tell them, "Oh yeah, that's."
Yeah, I think we try to pigeonhole, too many of these. Like that music learning theory isn't more of a whitewash across a bunch of stuff, like all the way from listening to theoretical understanding. That all of it's happening to one degree or another, all at the same time. And the one that you're focusing on is the one that's front and center. Sure. You can't skip levels and do very well if you don't have enough underpinning of the previous levels of learning. Skills.
Right. The one thing I'd say, and we talked about this in our episode on theoretical understanding, you do not need symbolic association to teach theoretical understanding. I think that's a false link between that, because go talk to countless jazz musicians who cannot read sheet music, but they know a lot of damn
the beast
theory.
of all beasts in that realm.
Yeah, so he had his instrumental association, which can be a type of symbolic association, because you're looking at a piano, it's very visual. But yeah, you can teach theoretical understanding. But I think what you're saying is right, is like there is a level of theoretical understanding taking place like almost at every level, except like basically just listening and singing back. Like things start creeping in, whether it's it's not full blown.
You're always associating any learning you're doing that's novel to something you've already learned, and that all goes back to whatever's going on in the mass of your brain before you're able to make words.
Which is why when you first start teaching people something, the first few things they learn, whether it's in math or in music or whatever, the first few things they learn take more trials to learn, because they have less things in their mind to compare it to. The later members that you add to a set, numbers or audiated patterns or functions, you learn faster because you have more things to compare them.
You're able to distinguish something out of the air by giving it a name, or you need the name to label something that, the furry thing that runs around four legs and all that, the experience of that, and eventually it becomes cat or dog or, raccoon or whatever.
That's what's interesting about the functions is that, so the way that I've talked about this Engelman guy a lot with you, but he's one of my, beside Gordon, I think I might be more interested in Engelman nowadays for sure. But
let's compare. Yeah, go ahead.
Engelman talked about like how like cats and dogs and all those things. Those are nouns conceptually, in terms of like there's no single cat you could show somebody that would educate somebody what a cat is. You actually have to show someone examples of multiple cats, because not all cats have the same size ears, same size legs, same coats. There's no single cat that can provide an example of what a cat is. So you have to show multiple examples. But I think this is why I'm starting to think of conceptualizing the voicings of functions themselves. Functions are like nouns in that sense, that there's no specific voicing of a function that is the end all one chord. It's a conglomeration of countless different variations of how you can voice something. And that's why when you teach using like harmonic learning sequence, like what you're doing, it's really useful to use different voicings, because someone actually has to hear like, okay, Mr. Eric, he played these sounds, like this one chord and this one chord and this one chord, they're all the same. He's referring to them all the same. They're all a cat, right? But if you just only play the same voicing all the time, you could introduce a misrule that says, oh, it's only when he plays do, mi, so, and sounds like that. That's what he's talking about.
Boil this down inside of partial synthesis, or the way you and I conceive of partial synthesis, is comparisons beyond the way that it's taught strictly, but the way that you and I and anybody learning music makes, choices, is because you have these other choices you can make with understanding. So, and that is a matter of, practice and
That's why when I use this G7 flat 9 example, if you teach someone to hear G like 5 chord with a G7
yeah,
or with a G9, sorry.
yeah,
Once they can hear that, it's very easy to teach what the flat 9 sounds like, because you can make this kind of pseudo partial synthesis between the two. And that's how I think you should do it.
And that'll happen at
really
generalization, our own generalization verbal association. And if you've gotten that far, and if the child has high enough aptitude, or your student has high enough aptitude, they'll be making those comparisons right away. And then what are you doing to expand that? And just give them more, right? Give them more keyalities, or give them more tonalities. Give them more, change, add content. And at some point, just put him in a band with peers that are better than him, and let him go.
Yeah, I mean, that is actually really useful, because what you start noticing when you're around people that are better than you, they play certain things all the time. and it's almost like they start doing like oral with you, like on some very loose level, where like, hey, this guy always voices this like 4 chord in this way. And then it stands out in your ear after a while, and you start picking up on it. All right, so put some minor 9 chords.
There you go. Does it stop being Dorian when you do that?
No, Dorian can handle minor 9.
Locrian can't handle much.
Can't handle much that we know of.
So far.
Not that we know of.
All right.
Phrygian, I don't really like minor 9 chords on. Phrygian this is really pretty in Phrygian, actually. If you do Phrygian, you can put the fog. You can put some crazy stuff over
Ralph.
fog.
Ralph Towner, the guitarist, used to play with.
Yeah.
So he played with Oregon, and then he also played with Paul Winter. But his stuff is special in terms of harmonically. It's just different than any other guitarist I've ever heard. So anyway, go listen to some of that. Put your minor 9s in your Dorian, and start tonal patterns. And as soon as you start to establish functions, and the kids are getting it, don't avoid. It's almost like a double negative. Don't avoid extensions. They're important. Start with the blues. That's where I would start.
Extensions are cool. Extensions are really interesting. I mean, we've talked about how the theoretical level of understanding is valid, even though it's downplayed, I think rightly, by Gordon, because so many people needed to hear his message. But that being said, it is surprisingly easy to theoretically teach chord construction on a piano. Like I had a student years ago who was like just turned 7, and she theoretically knew how to make 9th chords. It's like, oh, I do. We skipped 1, 3.
Yeah,
5, 6,
I know. That's it.
Like,
play one, skip one. Play one, skip one. Play one, skip one.
Yeah,
that's all.
Yeah, and I don't think that's inappropriate or detrimental to some audiation ability. If you do that, and also don't teach someone
a new kind of block to play in the corner, and there's no right way to build blocks. Just play with them. You'll learn from the experience of goofing around. And you find something you like to build, and build it again.
What was interesting, I showed her how to do that, and then the next week she came back and she was like, I made a 17th chord. And I was like, this is cool, but why does that not work? And then it only took a minute for her to understand. She's 7. After 13, there's no more numbers, because it's just the same thing over and over again. And she was like, and she's like, so I can only go up to 13. Like, yes. Well, I mean, if you unroll it in the right way, the stuff's not crazy for them.
There's people who have high space, right? What we got to get into some point space audiation, and whatever the heck that is. I have no fucking clue what he's saying in that book. There's our first major bleep. I really don't. I don't understand it. I don't get it. I haven't found anybody that can really tell me what it is. I have a feeling or a guess, but it doesn't what he's pointing to, but it doesn't come out in the words that he's expressing in the book. At least not yet. Maybe I'm just too stupid, but I don't get it. But at any rate, there's no reason not to use, spatial recognition that if somebody
Hmm.
has, because there's more than one intelligence that we're working with when somebody's taking a lesson with you. They're looking at the keyboard, they're looking at the guitar, they could be using their eyes. They can have spatial understanding like form and like that that's beyond. So there's also tactile and other things that are they're all working together. There's how many different kinds of music aptitudes are working together. Your rhythm, your tonal, your harmonic aptitude, right? And then there's, you know,
Sure. Well,
all
I
the
think
different.
I think there is a spatial sense of harmony in terms of like if I played like what could I do? If I played this add 9 chord versus this add 9 chord, they feel different spatially to me. Like it feels like my audiation is using some kind of spatial like metaphor to process that at the same time. And so far that's what I
Yeah,
have been able to uncover. They actually feel different. Like one feels more open and the other one
yeah,
feels more
yeah,
compact. Like that's
yeah,
the metaphor I would use to for how
yeah.
what it sounds like. I mean, it's not a coincidence that on the instrument it
Yeah.
literally feels like
To
that
to my
too.
point that I'm making is don't avoid using the other intelligences that your student is showing you outside of the music aptitude. There's vast differences in the way children learn, and it's not all due to music aptitude. And
Sure,
so,
sure. Well, I told you about this one kid that I had when I was, I think he was 8 or 9, but I taught him how to read guitar tablature, and he was there for guitar lessons. But whenever we were in the class, he always used to bang on the piano. So, um, uh, he basically taught himself how to turn guitar tab on one string into piano
yeah,
music. Like he theoretically understood. He was like, well, this is
yeah,
up one fret on the piano, this is up one key on or up one fret on the guitar, up one key on the piano. And for him, I mean, it's hard to sequence this stuff in any kind of coherent way, but he was definitely
yeah. Well,
ready to
he's
learn some of
playing.
those
He's
theoretical
playing.
ideas.
So he's
Yeah,
playing. That's it. My 2-year-olds come over and bang on my keyboard. So what do? I'll tell them stop if unless I'm going to get attacked by 8 kids all wanting to do the same thing. No, I bang with them and I'll
sure.
bang to a steady beat with them, or I'll whatever tones they're hitting, I'll try to turn into some harmony or melody or something that matches what they're doing. Um,
Mhm.
but we're just playing together. I don't care that it's bang noise. I'm gonna get to somewhere. I'm gonna get the tonal or the rhythm understanding with him. Even though he's 1.5 or 2, whatever. They
Sure.
they love to come over and see what kind of reaction they get, probably from me, but also from what they're playing. And then they start,
Yeah.
well, hey, what about the middle of the keyboard, and what about the other end of the keyboard? And what's wrong with that? Well, you don't have a lesson that's 30 minutes of kids banging, but to give them
Sure.
a minute of experience, and then just show them, fingers, hey, touch it instead of bang, um, and you you've shown them something. So, but yeah, when you started talking about bang, and I have that experience different ways. So anyway, there's a vast amount of differences. There's a vast amount of content. There's a vast amount of intelligence that's outside of music, and then there's a whole group of musical intelligences. All right, we probably exhausted.
Yeah, that was interesting. I like that
All right,
topic.
well, let's. I wasn't sure where it was going to go, how long it was going to go. We've probably met our hour.
Yeah,
All
yeah, we
right,
have.
let's
All
call it.
right.
Very
Till
good.
next time.